I'm Vito Mazzarino, and I work at Synopsys, here to share a case study with you, along with my co-presenter, Kristin Harris, who is from EZIA, and she'll be doing the second half where we actually get down into a lot of the meat of the implementation. So stay awake until Kristin gets on, okay? And we should have plenty of time for questions at the end. So first of all, just want to give you a little bit of the story and who we are, what we do. At Synopsys, we have a customer portal that we call SolvNet. And SolvNet is our online facility for our customers to get in, get the information they need about our products, the bugs and such, and get out. And SolvNet really is a strong differentiator for us and for our customer success. And in this latest round, an incarnation of SolvNet, we've used Alfresco as the foundation, the real basis of what's underneath the content production for SolvNet and a system we call Submit It. First, I want to tell you a little bit about Synopsys because we're not a household name. You may have never heard of us. Bear with me. I'm going to go through a few of the obligatory marketing slides that introduce us. But we're part of the EDA industry, electronic design automation, and IP, intellectual property. So we build the software that is used to build hardware. And we enable a much bigger value chain. We are part of the bottom of this value chain along with embedded software, which could be just microcontroller code or could be something like Linux or Android. We enable the foundry business. This is TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, UMC, Global Foundries, all the guys that really build the chips. And even Intel and Samsung now are opening up their fabs to a non-captive audience. That in turn, the semiconductor companies. These are companies like Broadcom, like Qualcomm, making the Snapdragon processor that's in many of your phones, or NVIDIA producing the Tegra processor that's the console on your Tesla car. And in turn, that enables the larger business, the full electronic systems business, which are the Apples and Toshibas and everybody else in the world that has the products that you all enjoy. I think everybody in this room is very familiar with that marketplace. There's probably somebody on the planet somewhere that doesn't benefit from this or touch it, but I know at a conference like this, it's not the case. I've seen a number of belt area networks today, so I'm sure there's a lot of people that are familiar with the mobile side of it, the data center, but we're also playing in the automotive market. As a matter of fact, I've been told that the silicon now in a car costs more than the steel or plastic, as it is with a lot of cars. So important part of those industries. Synopsys, we are the leader in the EDA industry. Proud to say that this last quarter, at the end of our Q3, we just passed the $2 billion mark. So we're not a huge company, but in our space, we are the leader and we're pretty big. So 4 quarters trailing revenue, we crossed the $2 billion. We are a technology company. The accountants are fast to remind us all the time that we spend too much money on R&D. 33% of the revenue goes into R&D. And about 8,000 engineers between applications and R&D around the world. Our revenues, 50% in North America and 50% international. And Asia-Pac is the growing portion of that, kind of eating the Japanese and European markets these days. So where do we fit in the world? We are here. We're a software company that is essentially the 16th largest software company in the world. With this crowd, I would describe it as we're a little bit ahead of Red Hat, and we're probably chasing Citrix or maybe even VMware if we want to think real big. This graph gives a little bit, I don't expect you to read this or no test on this later, but it gives you some sense of our acquisition and mergers that we've been through, like many of you. I assume most of you touch content, managing content in some way, directly or indirectly, or the machinery around that. And if you're like me, when the company announces an acquisition or a merger, the first thing you think about is, oh my gosh, what kind of content am I going to have to absorb now? Is it structured, unstructured? Is there any metadata? What's in there, and how difficult is it going to be? And so part of our solution was to try to take care of this situation, make sure that we had a system that could adapt. Let's get a little bit farther down into the machinery, which is what you're really interested in. SolvNet, as I mentioned, is our customer portal. It's one of the 5 layers of service at Synopsys. We approach our customers with this model where we have education and application engineers and consulting services. But SolvNet is very unique in that it is the automated part of the service. So it's essentially infinitely scalable, right? Because it's a set of machines, whereas all of these other layers of service are human delivered. and they're not scalable, and they cost a lot of money, and it's difficult to hire the engineers, to place them in the geographies to help the customers. So SolvNet has become an extremely important part of our strategy. SolvNet's been around actually longer than the web. Originally, it was a tool that you emailed in a query, and it sent you back a results set in an email, and then you pick out what you wanted, you email that back in, and it would send you articles back. So thank goodness the web was invented, and we got to a more modern interface. But it's a very good tool for us. It's really helped us a lot. Customers appreciate it. It's 24/7 availability. At this point in time, it's a federation of applications, and the one we're really going to talk about here is the knowledge database, because that's where we're using Alfresco for our documentation. But there's other pieces in there, and we'll talk a little bit more about those as we go along here. At this point in time, we've got about 35,000 users that are unique users that use the site, not all the time, but that's the current authenticated user base. It is an authenticated site. We get about 1.3 million logins a year and over 8.4 million document views or downloads a year. So preparing this talk, I feel really good about those numbers, but then I walk into the Cisco presentation earlier or the Walmart presentation, realize that they do this in an hour, not a year. So bigger numbers. But for me, this was a big accomplishment for our customers. Here's the homepage to SolvNet. It's fairly simple, allows customers to get in and get at the different assets. It has a robust knowledge base, so you can come in and do searches, keyword searches. There's also faceting, so the customers can navigate through and find information in different modes. They can pick which sources. They can use advanced search. They can get at this information, and this is all fed from Alfresco. There's documentation in there that is tool methodology, the latest bug reports, FAQs, all the kind of things that customers need to get at to use our software. There's about 13,000 articles in there today, and we'll talk a little bit more about migration later. And we also have things like pre-recorded videos that help customers to migrate to the new release. They're able to download their software, their license keys, able to open up new issues that go into our CRM system. So it is a federation, but we want to concentrate on the knowledge base today. So submit it. This is the next layer down. Submit it is what we really did with Alfresco. This is the system to produce all the documentation. It's used by engineers in the company, wherever they may be, across our 86 offices around the world. Last year, we had about 535 unique authors that came into the system. And some of them use the system only once a quarter, come in and write an article about some technical problem, get it in. There's others that in the support groups that kind of live in the application, and they might produce dozens of articles a quarter. And we have some incentive programs and goals around that to keep it coming. We also have a set of reviewers, over 360 reviewers, and it was important in the system that the people can wear two hats and have different roles, because we do have subject matter experts that write articles. We don't allow them to be the reviewer on their own article, but they might be doing peer review. So we had to build a workflow and a system that allows these kind of flexibilities to go on. We started out with about 20,000 articles before the project, and I told you we got to 13,000, so we did some cleanup, took this as an opportunity to go through and get the old dead content out of there. Okay. Submit it. Here's a look at the dashlet, and Kristin will go in more depth on this later. But this is what we did with Alfresco. Hopefully we didn't make it unrecognizable, but we needed to build some things into the workflow, into the user interface that the users see that really make it a part of their daily tasks. At Synopsys, we've had a long tradition of knowledge management and sustainable knowledge management, and some of the things that we really adhere to is you've got to make it easy. This has to be part of their daily tasks. This has to be part of their job, not something that they do part-time or when they feel like it. So we tried to set up the system to reflect that. I've had a number of our partners that admire SolvNet and what it's done for them have come in and talked to me about, what's the secret sauce? How do you guys make this thing work so well? And it's always questions around the database and the repository and the search engine. It's all about getting the data out, they think, but that's not really the secret sauce. The search engine problem and all of that is a pretty well-known problem. It's important, but I think it's been solved many times. And of course, there's tuning and nuances. But the real secret sauce with us is getting the data in and building this environment of knowledge sharing where we get subject matter experts around the corporation always contributing into it. So make it easy for them to contribute. Set up peer reviews. Use the subject matter experts to make sure the content is clean and it's the right content. Give a feedback mechanism so content goes stale or you might have missed the target with the customers. Give them an opportunity to tell you about that. And we've also built hooks into our CRM system so when a support engineer closes a case, they can check a box that says, okay, this particular case, there should be an article about it, so we don't have to solve this again. And the team put in a facility where hit the checkbox, close the case, it actually injects into the workflow and creates a placeholder, a new article with some of the metadata already populated. This way, when the engineer has time, they go over to their queue and submit it on Alfresco, and it's laid out for them. They have that. They didn't lose that they need to do it, and they can go ahead and complete it. So it gives us this article creation workflow and a publishing mechanism. The challenge that we were up against, the old system was, about 12, maybe even older, a little older than 12 years old. It was built on a commercially available content management system that we bought way back when. And over the years, there were restrictions and constraints that we just couldn't live with. And so we kept replacing pieces of it, pulling this piece out and this piece out, till pretty soon we had the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz. There was really nothing left of the original content management system. So we had this homegrown patchwork, and over the years, it got to be harder to maintain. We knew that we need to make a switch. So we went out and took a look on the marketplace and figure out what do we really need. And a lot of that was matching to our problem and matching to the team. I have a small Java development team that we're a satellite IT group. We're not in the main IT group of the company. A very competent team that's been there long tenure, but their focus has really been on back-end database design and Java. We knew that going into Alfresco, this was going to be a different kind of project. There's going to be more GUI work, and dealing with share, we were going to have a lot higher Java skills, JavaScript skills. So we thought we needed help. Also, the team had been used to doing waterfall development for several years, and now we were going to make a transition to Agile. They had done one project, Agile, and in that project, really, it was a slow adoption. We didn't certainly take on all the attributes of Agile. So we needed help with that. And like I say, long history with open source, but not with Alfresco. And this is where EZIA entered. So we had talked to a number of different implementation partners, different consulting groups, tried to find out what is the best for us, and talked to a number that wanted to do turnkey work. That's not what we were looking for. I was really looking for an outside consulting firm that can bring in the right architect, work with our people, do some project management, get us into Agile. And when they left, after the project was released, I wanted to make sure that my team had acquired the knowledge to be self-sufficient afterwards. And so EZIA was the fit for us. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Kristin, who will tell you a little bit more about EZIA and the implementation.
Thanks, Vito.
On your own.
Okay. So as Vito said, Synopsys picked EZIA to come in both from the perspective of our knowledge of Alfresco and our expertise there, but also for our skills in trying to really figure out how do they want to work and how do we do this with Agile in a way that gives them some results in a quick manner. So EZIA is certainly an expert in both. We deal with a lot of enterprise content management projects. We also deal with projects around enterprise integration, global integration, as well as enterprise mobility. We were one of the first groups with Alfresco to build the mobile app, so we have a lot of expertise there as well. We're very focused on our partnerships, both with Alfresco, with the tools, as well as with our partners, our customers. We consider them our partners as well. And in this project, Vito really didn't mention, but we have additional tools that we also help them integrate. So he talked about the CRM system, for example. That integration was afforded also with the help of MuleSoft. So we're able to move content and information across the company by also having this bus, this effect of saying, hey, there's information that needs to come into Alfresco. How do we do that? And abstract that from a very specific and hard implementation or integration there. And then, as we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation, we also help them integrate JasperSoft. So some of those analytics that have been missing from Alfresco, we help them surface those as well. So our message for you, here we are 20 minutes into this, but we want to make sure that you're awake, and hopefully those of you in the audience, some of this will resonate with you. That what you're trying to do, maybe some of the same things that Vito and the team were trying to do. You really wanted to transform perhaps your business processes, and you want to use Alfresco to help you do that. You want to be able to increase efficiency of how you're creating content and how you're publishing that. And again, that you might not just be publishing it to one place, but to many places. And that you want to perhaps publish all the way out to the web and reduce the cycle time to do that. You don't want to wait overnight to publish something outside your firewall. So hopefully, as we talk about this and as you look at what we did with Alfresco, it'll resonate. We came in with the team, and part of what EZIA really believes in is our approach. So one of our first approaches is to sit with the team and say, what are your business goals? Let's make sure we understand those business goals. Do you know what your users are trying to do? And Vito talked about some of these, knowing that they had a very old system that was really difficult to maintain and had grown all these arms and warts and things, and they just didn't want that anymore. They knew pretty much when we walked in the door, they had these business critical goals. And when EZIA came in, we looked at these, and we thought, gosh, this team has their stuff together. They know what they need to accomplish. And yet we still felt that our methodology was critical when we came in. We wanted to come in and do discovery with them. They had done this extensively, and yet they needed a fresh eye. This is one of the things that EZIA is very good at. Coming in and doing this first piece, this first half of our story here is our approach around the business and technical assessment. We come in, we look at those business goals, and we turn them into success criteria. So you want to do reporting. That's a great goal, but what are you really reporting on? How do we make sure our content model will express that and we'll be able to see that in your reports when we get through the project? So we take every single business requirement they had and said, let's quantify this. Let's make sure we really understand what success looks like with these measures. As Vito talked about, we were really into deciding, how do we build this team? How do we teach the Synopsys team what we know? The last thing EZIA wants to do is be there forever. We'd rather go off and solve the next big problem, although we miss them dearly when we're not there. But certainly it's important to us to empower their team to manage this project after we leave. So leveraging that is really important. And from the perspective of both the engineers who would take work on and the executives, it's important to have a macro level plan with micro level view. And this is, again, what we really specialize is the executives want to know, how long is this going to take and what is it going to cost? And the developers want to know, what should I work on first and where do I go from here? And so both of those things EZIA brought to the table. The other piece about our approach was something that Vito touched on, was we wanted to help them do Agile better. We wanted, they had pages and pages of requirements. How did we break those down into user stories? How does that become something quantifiable in a sprint that we can go work on? And how does that become tasks and subtasks in the plan? And those sorts of visibility into how do you set goals so you build the minimum viable product and get that out the door, and then plan it and add features later. This was our mantra with the team, and this is how we did Agile with them and taught them how to do that and be successful in that area. Now on that note, as we started breaking down things into tasks, this project took on a lot of personalities. There were a lot of components and themes in our sprints, and we realized, for example, that when we broke things down, we knew what we needed to do in the Share UI, and it became a lot of work. We decided, hey, we have all these requirements. Our users want to use the system as such. They need this feature or that feature. We started to build this pie, and we started to get this piece of the pie growing and growing. And so, again, we came in and said, hey, how do you make sure that you don't over-customize this system? Use what's in the box. Do what you can to make the users the tools for them useful and that they can adopt, but don't over-customize it. In addition to that, we learned things about, for example, data migration. Initially, we thought that was about 8 story points or eight discrete tasks. And over time, what we realized was that wasn't enough. We didn't know enough about the legacy content. And so this initial snapshot became a way to help us organize our resources and organize our plan, but it also continued to change throughout the project. The pieces of the pie changed as we went forward. Then, in addition to having that agile workbench and all of our stories and our tasks and our sprints, the team was very traditionally waterfall. I think Vito really needed to see, when are you going to be done? And I don't just mean with this sprint, I mean with the project. And so we really did have to set out project milestones. And again, as we went through that, we learned that the orange bits there are the things you traditionally think about as a development team. We need to build features. We need to build article creation. We need to have workflows. We need to have peer reviews. We need to be able to report on it. And these were the guts of what the team thought we needed to build when we came in. And what we realized was we really needed this green stuff before that. So EZIA really came in and said, hey, besides this assessment and discovery that we're going to do, how do we empower you to build a foundation that helps you standardize how you deploy this software? Because if we walk out the door and we've handed you a bunch of code or we've worked with you to build it and you don't know how to deploy it and you have a server that goes down and you need to rebuild it, you're going to have a hard time. So building that foundation around how we would build the software, how we would deploy it, how we would consistently do that, all happened in the midst of us also doing the initial stages of development. And then the blue piece there from a roadmap perspective was not only do we need to build everything, but we need to have a plan for how we roll it out. Because we've heard about this from other folks throughout this morning. How do you deal with user adoption? How do you make sure that you are not going to roll out a set of tools that people aren't going to know how to use? And so that blue line kind of started really early on. And that leads me to the second half of our approach. The other half of the approach was really all about the users and making sure that we involved those users very early in the process. So we did the planning, we built this on Agile, we determined what minimum viable product was going to look like, and then the team got very busy with communicating out to those stakeholders. This is what's going to change in your world. In fact, we want your input. We gave them a set of rules that said, this is how the new submitted is going to work. These are our goals, this is our success criteria, and they could be hand in hand with the team, with email blasts or with reach out meetings. Troy here went across the world teaching people how to test the system and provide us input. So we did previews, we did mini UATs before we did a big bang UAT near the end of the project. And we highly recommend that you bring those stakeholders in, not only for them to give you every new requirement under the sun, give them rules, give them some boundaries, let them know what minimum viable product really means, where you're trying to go with the project. Then if they give you feedback and they feel like it fell on deaf ears, at least they know there were some rules for their engagement in the beginning. They knew that they were going to be working with you under a certain set of goals. The other thing I think that's important and part of that blue box is just the idea that rollout strategy was critical. And I think if we learned anything from the project, we perhaps let the idea of migrating the legacy content into the system a little bit late in the process. We did okay. We ended up creating a platform where they can do a merger and acquisition and bring that content back in. But certainly the content itself was more important really than anything else. And we needed to make sure that we had that careful preservation of the content. I already talked about the continuous testing and integration. That was part of that, how are you going to deploy code idea. Okay, so what we had initially was something old and crusty and very difficult to use. And what we had after was an integrated system with Alfresco in the middle, with MuleSoft helping to publish content out or to bring data into the system, and with the Jaspersoft reports that allowed them to get the robust reporting that they really needed. What does it look like? So Vito showed this a few minutes ago. It's really just Alfresco Share with some things kind of ripped out of it, if you will, or hidden from the user. One of the things you'll notice that there is no document library. The concept of the document library is not there because for the most part, people were working in workflows. People were working off their task list, or they were working in this custom dashlet that they built that allowed them to see, these are just my SolvNet articles, the articles I happen to own or I'm working on. And we created a bunch of filters for them to be able to slice and dice the content that they were working on. So instead of the concept just became my SolvNet articles. And so what might seem very simple, just a dashlet, was a good amount of work to figure out, well, how do we get the right things appearing in this dashlet? How do we hide the concept of a document library or a share site from people? So those are the kind of things that we struggled with to make sure that the user interface was very simple for them in Alfresco. And as you know with Share, things get exposed all over the place. So the concept of a site or a document library shows up in search, for example. So there was a lot of things we had to take into account when we decided to hide those things from users. It became a little bit more difficult than just simply removing them from the UI because they would appear in and about all around the place. On this side of the screen here, on your left side, we see that this is their edit content. So the idea of an article could just be a text article, could be something that they needed to publish just with a little bit of rich formatting in it. And so we use some simple forms in Share to create content. The idea that they could connect that content to a product taxonomy was also really unique. So they were able to load the taxonomy of the products, the level 1 product, maybe the product family or the concept of the product, and the level 2 being what are all those pieces of products that support this product or that are a piece of it. And connecting that to the article was critical because that triggered how the workflows would work. So we needed to have that information when those articles were created. But for the most part, you see a content editing screen here that's pretty much out of the box with a few tweaks on it for the metadata, for how we triggered that, and for the rich text. On the other side is a typical workflow form. And it's always hard to show workflow. They showed a lot of workflow this morning, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty savvy with workflow, but I got lost in what they showed me. So we weren't, in this talk here, we're not going to go through the workflow, but some of the interesting things that we did with it connected things like the comment history for the workflow. Something these guys really wanted to surface because as the articles flowed through the workflow, it'd be nice to know what did that grammatical reviewer say 2 steps back. And surfacing that right here in the form was really critical for them. That's a piece of that quality for their content and timeliness on making sure they had the right content published to the web. The workflow is much more than just a 2-step workflow. There's the ability to change the direction of the workflow depending upon over the product that they chose. It could have a more complex workflow than another product. And there's that 80-20 rule. Certain products and their articles needed to be more scrutinized than other ones. So how they set that up was definitely connected to which product the article was for and which workflow would go with that. This is an example of how they used a list in Alfresco. So you typically think of the list in Alfresco and you think, what am I going to do with this? You know, I mean, it's kind of like a SharePoint thing, only it doesn't really work like SharePoint because I can't add stuff to it very easily. So we came up with this concept that if we could get some data about the products and attach that, for example, what kind of review a product should have and who were the assignees that would be attached to that workflow, and then we could use that and leverage that when a workflow was spawned. So we used the list concept so that an average product owner, so if I was a product owner of BSD compiler or one of the other products, I could manage within this list the type of workflow my product should have when an article is created for it, and what sort of people or who those people were that should be part of that workflow. So this became a really nice way for the average user to do some of the customization on the workflow for their product without having to go to IT to have that happen. So this is one of those things where, remember, their original business goals were around flexibility of workflow. When you first think about workflow in Alfresco, you think, well, an IT guy's going to have to build that, a developer will have to build that, and it's not real flexible. So surfacing this idea of the data list, a tool that a normal business user could understand and use, and then leverage that as we triggered it with workflows was really, really a unique way of doing that. We talked about how the reporting was critical. For these guys, understanding the landscape of their articles in SolvNet was critical. So if they didn't know, what articles had been published, or who were those authors that had actively worked on workflows, on articles, how old are those? For example, if a reviewer was stuck and was sitting and hadn't looked at an article in their workflow for 6 days or 7 days, shouldn't we let somebody know about that? This might be a critical article that needs to go out. And so these sorts of things are all in the workflow history inside of Alfresco. There's all those details inside of the Alfresco database about what's happening with the workflow, and it's impossible to get to it. You think, well, there's all this data about the workflow, and I actually can't surface that. So what we did was built a way to get that data out of Alfresco and into a database so that Jasper could look at it and provide some really great reports on top of that. We've kind of whited out here who the people are that we're looking at inside of the company. But for example, this report, I believe, is just able to say, well, what's happening with the articles about a certain product? And what, for example, which article is in which phase of a workflow? Is it in the technical review phase? Is it in a grammatical review, et cetera? And how long has it been sitting there? Here we are able to see a weekly report that says, hey, managers, you have an employee that is sitting there with a workflow that's more than 7 days old. You might want to nudge that person. Or, we did build some things into the workflow that allowed for people who are on vacation to say, hey, guess what, this person shouldn't be in the workflow at this point in time. But there's always times when the manager needs to know what's happening with the workflow, where they're stuck, where they're sitting, and this report helped them do that as well. So some takeaways from this. I think the ideas around continuous integration that I talked about, understanding how to architect your code for Alfresco is critical. You can't be agile if you don't know how to deploy your code quickly and consistently. And so that continuous integration was really critical for this project. In fact, we spent extra time in the beginning, and Vito was like, so when am I going to see something? And we were saying, hey, we're still building the foundation, but you're going to like it because in the future, when we add functionality, it'll be easier to deploy. We also felt that, EZIA came and we tried to caution about too much share customization, and yet these guys had a really important business case. And as Vito pointed out, they had users who might only use the system once a quarter. And so as much as we didn't want to customize too much, we did need to make the user interface simpler. It didn't need to look like a collaboration tool. It needed to look like a workflow document creation tool. And so the share customization for them was no small undertaking. And that is something, they continue to make sure they have the right resources in-house to manage that. And then I pointed this out before. Anytime you're doing your planning, know why you have data in the system and how you want to leverage that in the long run. The idea of these reports that they wanted to pull out of the Alfresco workflow was critical to know as they were working. And then they knew they could get that out in the end. So building your model for reporting later is really critical. I want to point out the other things about migration. My mantra on migration is plan, and then test it, and then plan again, because you're going to miss something. And we sat with them looking at their legacy data for quite a long time and planning migration for that. How are we going to get this metadata out of an old database? How are we going to move it into Alfresco? And we planned and planned, we tested, we realized all the things we missed, and then we planned again. So that's really critical as you look at migration. I talked about bringing those stakeholders to the table, giving them knowledge about what you're doing, giving them boundaries for where you're going, helping them understand what minimum viable product is before you show them at the end and they're really frustrated with the tool that you gave them. Continuing those conversations after rollout is also important. Those folks are going to be your biggest advocates out there helping adoption, and they're going to have requests for new features, so make sure you continue those conversations. And then I just got to plug again, plan, test, and know those steps for migration because it's always going to bite you. So there's future opportunities. There's more things that these guys can do with Alfresco. In fact, they're working on taking out the editing tool that's there now and making sure that one of the biggest things the users complained about is, I don't like the authoring tools. It doesn't look like Microsoft Word. They used to author in Microsoft Word. I don't like the inability for me to write code and just say this is a code snippet. And so they're working on bringing in a better authoring tool inside of Alfresco for that creation of articles. The other thing I think that was kind of tough for the users is in Alfresco they're authoring content, but ultimately it's being published somewhere else. What is that in context? What is it going to look like? How's that article really going to look like when it's on SolvNet? So building some sort of custom preview, and they're continuing to work on this. How do we make sure that the user who's writing the article can feel like they like the way their article looks? It looks like it's in context inside of SolvNet. There's also the idea for these guys more integration with the way the rest of the business works. So for example, when they get bug reports, they call them stars, and they get those star reports, it'd be nice to, if you have an accepted workaround for that, it just needs to go to SolvNet. There doesn't need to be a lot of workflow around that. So integrating how to get those accepted workarounds published automatically is an opportunity for them. And again, it cuts out time in terms of publishing, in terms of getting things out to the web. Continuing to work on new document types within the publishing, as well as tweaks to the workflow and some more robust opportunities to change the workflows. And then, as we've heard about from a couple of other speakers already this morning, planning for an upgrade. So not wanting to fall 12 years behind on the technology, making sure they're looking forward, whether it's 4.2 or whether it's 5.0, making sure that planning for that next upgrade can be done and creating a sandbox environment for how do we deal with the customizations to share when share is changing with new features and new functionality. So this will be a part of what this team needs to do as they go forward, both the share UI, the workflows, and then maintaining the integrity of that reporting data as Alfresco changes on the back end. I think that's it. Any questions? Late in the day? Yeah, question back here.
The work you did with the list, is that integrated or was that just a separate place for them to go to find out who were reviewers for particular products? I wasn't clear.
It's integrated in that what they do there, the next time someone kicks off a workflow and chooses that product, it will change the way the workflow functions.
So it reads,
Yes.
created a connection between them to read that.
Yes. I really think that's one of the interesting, unique pieces of the project, and it definitely put the power in the hands of those product owners to say, this is how my product should be reviewed, or articles for my product. Awesome. Cool, thanks.